Hey guys, so today we've got the 70s, which is chapter 29 in AMSCO. So hopefully you read that and took notes. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. I'm probably just going to kind of hit the high points, the major topics here, just to make sure you've got that stuff for the exam. So first topic here is stagflation, which I know is a really weird term. So in the 50s and 60s that we've been covering, the economy was awesome. It was booming after World War II. When we hit the 70s, that's gonna slow down a lot. So this term comes from the combination of the word stagnation, which means like stalling out, getting slow, and inflation of prices. And so those together is not a good combination for the economy. We call it stagflation. Oil prices are also going to be really high. You read about that during the oil embargo from OPEC. Also, LBJ, who had been president previously, his Great Society programs were costing quite a bit of money for the federal government. So when Nixon is elected, he's going to slow down a lot of those things drastically. So this cartoon is a good demonstration of stagflation. This guy says, man, these fuel costs are killing me because of the inflation. The other guy says, I don't have to worry about commuting anymore. I lost my job because the unemployment is up from the stagnation. So both of those are not good for the economy. Next thing, this one is really tough to talk about. So in Vietnam, so the United States is still fighting the Vietnam War. There is an incident in My Lai where it's a village in South Vietnam. American troops murder a bunch of innocent civilians in this village of My Lai. The lieutenant, his name is Callie, he is really the only one to get any sort of punishment for this, and it's not even anything major. The significance of it is, one, it's embarrassing for the United States on the world stage, but also it is proof to our government and the American public that we need to get out of Vietnam. We've been there way too long. There's no end in sight. We keep thinking this war is going to be over and we escalate, and then stuff like this is happening. Like our troops are losing it and morale is gone over there. So this is not a good thing for the United States. Further proof to Nixon that it is time to get out of Vietnam. Next thing, Kent State protests. So Nixon starts this policy of Vietnamization, which is a mouthful. Basically, we're going to turn the war over to Vietnam to handle their own war. And then America is going to back away and we're going to leave. That's his way of getting out of the Vietnam War. So you would think doing that, he wouldn't want to launch a new invasion, but he does. So Nixon decides that the communists, the VC in Vietnam, Viet Cong, are bringing supplies through Cambodia, which I don't have a map, but it's beside Vietnam. So he announces, we're going to invade Cambodia, launch this bombing campaign to try to smoke out this Ho Chi Minh Trail where they're bringing in supplies. There is outrage at this. So we're supposed to be getting out of the Vietnam War, and now Nixon is invading somewhere else. So at Kent State University in Ohio, they have a protest. They end up burning down the ROTC building, so things get pretty violent. So they bring in the National Guard to keep order. No one really knows what happened. At some point, the National Guard start firing into the crowd, and 4 onlookers are killed by the National Guard. So this famous picture down here won a Pulitzer Prize of this girl at Kent State beside one of the bodies of the 4 students that got shot. Also, this leads the Senate to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which hopefully you remember. That was where they gave Lyndon Johnson, the president at the time, to do permission to do whatever he wanted in Vietnam. And that is why he escalated the troop numbers so drastically. They take that away, say, okay, we don't need the president to have unilateral power to do whatever he wants with foreign affairs in Vietnam. So that is repealed. Another bad thing, I feel like this is all just bad stuff, but that's the 70s. The Pentagon Papers are released. So what these are secret government documents that are leaked to the New York Times. So in June of 1971, there are 7,000 pages of leaked government documents, classified documents. Oh, sorry, I lied. The Post, that's who they leaked them to. And there's a really good movie, that's why I have that here, with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep about this. It's a couple years old, but it's good. You should watch it. In these papers are lies from going all the way back to the Kennedy administration. So Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, things that the government has lied to the American people about in regards to the Vietnam War. So they're already not very trusting of the government. This is going to add to that majorly. Then you add Watergate, the American people really are going to start having a lot of distrust of their government. So the Pentagon Papers is proof that especially LBJ, like the Gulf of Tonkin, that probably didn't even really happen like they said it did. And he used that to get his resolution to do whatever he wanted and escalate. And it was like they were lying about it to the American people. So this is bad for America. Here's kind of a positive thing. So this is good. So Nixon, there he is the first one to open up relationships with China. Since they had become communist after World War II, early Cold War, we had nothing to do with China because they're communist. We don't like it. Mao Zedong is still their leader. You can see him in the background there. He opens up diplomacy. So the way he opens the door is he sends the American ping pong team to China. So if you've seen Forrest Gump, that's where he goes and he says, we're the first people to go to the land of China in like 1,000,000 years. That's Forrest Gump. But that really happened. So we send our ping pong team, then he goes to China to meet with Mao Zedong. And that is a big step for our relationship with communist China. We call this period détente, which is a strange word. All it means is like a relaxing of tensions. So under Nixon, we try to relax the issues that we're having with the Soviet Union and with China. So here he is meeting with Brezhnev, who's the leader of the Soviet Union. He signs SALT, which you read about in AMSCO. I didn't put it on here, but it is important. Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. There's going to end up being 2 of them, but Nixon signs the first, which is limiting nuclear weapons so that hopefully we don't have World War III and blow each other up. So that's positive. This book, so in the crash course that you watched for the 1960s, John Green mentioned this because it is so, so important. AP exam loves to ask about Silent Spring. It is a book by Rachel Carson, there she is, about the danger of pesticides being used on food that we consume. So up until this point, there hadn't been a lot of research or evidence presented to the American people about the dangers of these things. So this book is eye-opening for a lot of people. It leads Richard Nixon to create the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which if you think of Nixon, you don't usually think of like environment type of stuff, but he actually did a lot. There's Clean Air and Water Act, EPA under Nixon, and it's largely because of this book. So kind of like Upton Sinclair and the Jungle back in the Gilded Age with the meat packing, where Teddy Roosevelt read it and was like, oh my gosh, there's nasty stuff in our meat. We got to fix it. Silent Spring is that, but for the environment. And it leads Nixon and others to start passing laws to try to help the environment. Next thing, energy crisis. So OPEC, those oil producing countries get together and embargo. So they refused to send oil to the United States in October of 73. This is not good. So now we don't have gas for our cars. So ask some of your grandparents. They might remember when this happened. I'm sure they do, that there were lines at gas stations a mile long, gas stations saying, sorry, no gas. Like they just did not have gasoline for the cars. We call this period the energy crisis because America is scrambling and kind of panicked on where we're going to get oil. They set a national speed limit at 55 miles an hour to try to conserve gasoline. Like if you're going 70, you're burning a lot more gas. So that's why a lot of those 55 mile an hour highway speed limits were set in the 70s to try to conserve gas. War Powers Act. So this is passed a little bit in response to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that had given the president the power to do whatever he wanted. So we said Nixon launched an invasion in Cambodia that is right beside Vietnam. This is going to set off, it's not even really a civil war. It's just like a murderous communist regime that takes power in Cambodia because we destabilized the region. Oops. So this group is called the Khmer Rouge. The leader, I know it's a funny name, Pol Pot, but he is not a funny guy. He murders 1 million of his own citizens. And there are just gruesome images you can see from this one, just piles of skulls and bones, killing his own people within Cambodia. And that's partially because of the American involvement in the bombings that took place there as part of the Vietnam War. Congress repeals this resolution. I mentioned that before. And they pass this War Powers Act, which limits the wartime powers of the president. They recognize that it was a mistake to let LBJ escalate the war in Vietnam as much as he wanted. And Nixon also had a free hand to do whatever he wanted. So this War Powers Act makes it to where presidents now can't just do whatever they want when it comes to war. They have to go through Congress to get those things approved. Next is Watergate. I'm sure you've heard of this before. If you don't know the background, well, you read your book, you do. So Nixon's just a paranoid guy. People ask all the time, like, why would he do this? This seems really stupid. And it was. He was just convinced that everybody was out to get him. So he has people break in. He's a Republican. He's about to run for re-election. He has 5 people break into the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. That's why it's called that, in DC. They end up getting caught. Nixon denies knowing anything about it. He says, I didn't know anything about that. Who are these guys? I don't know. But he gets caught because there are secret tapes from the Oval Office that have recorded him talking about this. Like, it is proof that he did know about this. There's one in particular they call the smoking gun tape, that it's like, well, you lied. You knew about this. So he's going to be impeached. And in order to avoid that, he resigns. So people are always like, oh, Nixon was impeached. He wasn't, technically. He would have been, but he sees that coming, so he just decides to leave on his own. He never really takes responsibility for this. Even in the speech where he says he's resigning, he says it like, oh, I'm just doing what's best for the country, and never actually acknowledges that he had a part in this. I mean, he never really has to answer for it, because then Ford, who comes after him, pardons him, and he doesn't have to answer for his lies or his crimes at all. So here's Ford, first unelected president. So he was not elected president or vice president. So Nixon's first vice president, Spiro Agnew, had been forced to leave office. He had scandalous tax evasion stuff. So then he appoints Gerald Ford. So the American people are like, who is this guy? We have never even voted for him. He kind of has a reputation for being dumb, which I don't know that that's a fair assessment. He was like a college football player, and they're like, oh, he's just a dumb jock. LBJ, who's just a funny guy, this was his quote: Jerry Ford is so dumb he can't fart and chew gum at the same time. So that's just kind of the perception of Gerald Ford, that he's an idiot. The one thing he does that's notable is pardon Nixon, and it causes outrage. Like, he's just been caught in all of this Watergate stuff, and now he doesn't have to answer for any of it. He just gets off scot-free. So here's some protest. Nixon defies justice, did not commit pardonable offenses. So now we never will know what exactly happened, because Nixon just gets pardoned by Ford. Vietnam. So we have left Vietnam at this point, or most American troops have left. So this war had raged on for a decade at this point. Immediately after American forces withdraw in April of 1975, communist North Vietnam comes back in and takes the South, making this entire war totally pointless, which I know is painful. So the Americans that are left in Saigon are forced to evacuate. Like, you see these pictures of people like hanging off of helicopters, because if you had still been in Saigon, the capital, when the North came in, they would probably kill you. So it's Operation Frequent Wind, where they're bringing helicopter after helicopter to try to get people out of Vietnam. This makes the war totally pointless, which is just painful, because tens of thousands of Americans and Vietnamese people had died in this war that now was for nothing, because the North just came in and retook the South as soon as we leave. So this cartoon, you get, people argue a lot about whose fault the Vietnam War was. So it goes all the way back to Eisenhower. Not I, said Ike. I just sent money. Here's Kennedy. Not I, said Jack. I just sent advisors. After Kennedy, here's LBJ. Not I, said Lyndon. I just followed Jack. So like, it's Kennedy's fault. Nixon. Not I, said Dick. I just honored Jack and Lyndon's commitments. Here's Gerald Ford, who's dumb. Not I, said Jerry. What was the question? He doesn't even know what's going on. And then Henry Kissinger, who was National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under Nixon, you lost Vietnam because you didn't trust your leader. So he's blaming the American people, that it's their fault for not putting enough faith in the government. So no one takes responsibility, but either way, one of the largest foreign policy blunders in America's history. There's no argument to be made that we won in any form in Vietnam. Huge failure. All right, to finish up, we have the feminist movement. So back in the 50s, we talked about Betty Friedan in The Feminine Mystique, her book about you don't have to be a housewife, it's okay. That sparks this second wave feminism. So in the 60s, 70s, this really heats up. I have the National Organization for Women. Gloria Steinem, that's her right here, is also a key figure in this movement. She has a magazine called Ms. Magazine. She's a feminist. So they're pushing for contraceptives, reproductive rights. We know Roe versus Wade is going to be passed in the 70s, the abortion Supreme Court case that is super controversial to this day. So all that plays into this feminist movement. As a part of this, they try to get an equal rights amendment passed. We call it the ERA, where basically it's just a federal law that says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And it gets really close to passing. They need 38 states to ratify it. I think it ends up being too short from passing. Part of the reason it fails is because this lady, Phyllis Schlafly, it's a weird name, I know. She is what we would call an anti-feminist, which seems odd that a woman would argue that women don't need rights. But that is her argument. So she leads this whole Stop the ERA campaign. It ends up failing. So to this day, we do not have a federal amendment that says women have equal rights under the law, which is crazy, but it failed. It was 2 states short. So there she is. She died in the last couple years, but that was her in 2016. She was still politically active up until the day that she died. So that was Phyllis Schlafly. So there she is. All right, last thing, Iranian hostage crisis. So backstory, in the 50s, we install a Shah, or like a leader of Iran, with our CIA under Eisenhower. He's not popular, so there is a revolution in Iran where they overthrow this guy, Pahlavi. They want to kill him, but instead of letting them have him, we bring him to the United States for cancer treatment. That makes young people in Iran really angry. So they storm the US embassy, take a bunch of American hostages, and hold them for over a year. Another really good movie is called Argo, Ben Affleck, about how they got these hostages out, or they were trying to. So we call this the Iranian hostage crisis. This will plague Jimmy Carter's presidency. He's going to spend his whole presidency trying to get them freed, or the whole last year of it, get them freed. And they are not released until the first day of the Reagan administration. That's when they are freed. And under Carter, there were some failed attempts to get them out, but they weren't successful. So that's it for the 70s. Next week, we're going to finish up content with the 80s and the 90s super quickly, and then we'll get into exam review. So let me know if y'all have any questions, and I hope y'all have a great day.